This is the culture we are living in. And unfortunately, there are so many Christians who know the truth, but they would rather not ruffle feathers.
How can we really be raising up this next generation of kids, all the way from the itty bitties? I know your girls are still little, they're teeny tiny. Mine are not so little anymore. How can we be raising up this next generation to impact God's kingdom around them?
Yeah, well, and we talked a little bit offline about this. I'm so excited we can talk about this now on the program. It's something that when we look at where we are, so often parents can get overwhelmed by the problems and the challenges and the issues. But I will tell you, I'm encouraged as an individual. I love the time we are living in. And I think it's one of the best times to be a Christian in the history of our nation, because we really haven't seen moments where truth was more uncertain and where more people were looking for truth than right now at these moments in America. There
Yeah.
are people that are so hungry for truth and they just don't know where to find it. And one of the challenges in culture is I mean, you mentioned, right, so often the left, and even, right, I had a mentor growing up who'd say the devil's crowd is loud, that the
Oh,
other side are very loud at times, but they're not often the majority. Usually it's the minority, but they're so loud. Christians often find ourselves at a place that we maybe get intimidated. We don't want to cause trouble. We don't want to stir things up. And so we end up being quiet. And because we're quiet, it makes the other side seem even louder and more powerful. And it comes down to, at some point, we have to have the courage to stand up and do the right thing. One of the verses that we've been referencing a lot over the last year or so, it really came alive to us during COVID, is Revelation 21:8. It's a verse that when I was growing up, I learned as a kid. There was a song about liars going to hell. And so I learned that song about liars going to hell. Don't be a liar. But it's interesting is it goes to the list of the people that will have their place in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. The very first group listed, and just to give a little context, it talks about the murderers and the adulterers and the sorcerers and the liars and people who are generally doing very, very bad things.
mhm.
The very first group identified on that list, it said the cowardly and the fearful. Now, the
Wow.
cowardly and the fearful, that's a totally different category, because that's not people actively doing the wrong thing.
Right.
That's people who know what's right and who aren't standing up for what's right. It's a little bit like James 4:17, where it says, to him who knows the good he ought to do and does it not, to him it is sin. If you know there's something good you should be doing, you don't do it, that's sinful, because you know you should have been doing the right thing. This is the culture we are living in. And unfortunately, there are so many Christians who know the truth, but they would rather not ruffle feathers, right? They maybe for some of them, they're like, man, I can't risk it with my job. It's, me providing for my family is too important. The problem is, when you have the majority of the nation that's cowering, that they're afraid of being canceled, they're afraid of being fired, they're afraid of offending somebody, right? They're afraid of losing friends, whatever the backlash is they think. If we don't have the courage to stand up for truth, then we will not stop this onslaught of evil, this onslaught of lies, which is what we're seeing happen in our culture and nation. But this is why I think that there's never been a greater time to be a Christian in America than right now, because people are actively looking for truth and they're not finding it. But this is where there's an opportunity for us as we're raising our kids. One of the things we want to be intentional about with our children, with the rising generation, is to tell them more stories like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, right? The people that in those moments, I mean, you mentioned Esther, right? Early on, as we were having this conversation,
Yeah.
the people that in those defining moments, man, they could have just kept their mouth shut, that, not gotten in trouble, right? I mean, Daniel could have said, hey, I still believe in God, but God understands. And so I don't want to cause any trouble. All right, I don't want to cross the king. And no. Daniel still 3 times a day in front of his window so people could see him. He
Yep.
wasn't going to back down, right? I mean, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in front of everybody. They're like, nope, we ain't going to do it.
Yep.
That's people of courage. And this is where we need to be intentional about not only giving our kids the truth, but then encouraging them to have the backbone and the courage to stand up for truth. Obviously, everything we want to do, we want to do it in the love of Jesus. Jesus spoke the truth in love, but he always spoke the truth. And we want to make sure that we are even setting the example as parents, that we have the courage to speak the truth, even when it's in love, knowing at times we might face backlash. And obviously, right, for us too, we both know this firsthand. As we take some of the positions we take, we deal with backlash from people commenting and posting and right confrontations at times at these public forums. We deal with this firsthand, but that's not something that should deter us. Jesus told all his followers, he said, they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you too. In the Beatitudes, he said, blessed are you when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. We don't want to raise kids in a bubble and tell them, right, don't cause trouble. We don't want you to be persecuted. No, at sometimes we need to say, hey, man, this is a great thing. When you stand up for truth and righteousness and there's pushback, that is a godly place to be, and God will honor and reward you taking a stand, in addition to the fact that cowardice literally is on the list of things that were the people that are going to be in the lake of fire and brimstone at the very end, right? The second death, second judgment, Revelation 21. That's not a place we want to be. We want to make sure we're promoting our kids to have the courage, but not just have courage and be obnoxious, to have courage to speak the truth in love, which also part of why we homeschool. We want to make sure that our kids know the truth. We live in a culture, right, that they don't even know male and female anymore, right? They're so confused on the basic issues. We want to make sure our kids know truth. And part of helping our kids know truth, and again, we talked about this a little bit offline, we need to make sure that our kids don't just know what's true, but understand why it's true, have the apologetics, because they're going to go to church with kids who are going to say, well, I just kind of feel I'm a guy, but I feel like a girl right now. They need to know what is true and why it is true, so they can even help some of their peers, some of their friends, some of the people maybe they play sports with, they go to church with, right? Whatever, youth group, whatever the situation is, they're going to be around people that are growing up in this worldly culture, right? This Egyptian, Babylonian, whatever kind of nation we want to ascribe it to from the Bible stance. They're going to grow up in that culture, and we want to make sure that not only we've given them the truth, that we've encouraged them to have the courage to speak the truth, but to have the apologetics and discernment to know why this is right and how to help guide and lead even some of their friends in that conversation, that search for truth. It's a great time to be a Christian. We just want to make sure we are intentional about how we raise our kids to engage in this culture.
I love that so much. And what a responsibility we have to be that example for our kids. Homeschool Insights is sponsored by CTC Math. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com and try it for free. For more great homeschool inspiration and resources, listen to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.